Hi everyone, this is Matt. Welcome back to my channel. Today we have Rinks here with us for the second part of our interviews, of our three-part interview. Rinks is a scientist too, working at a biotech down south near Cambridge in England, south of England. And we're going to talk today about Rinks's day-to-day life as a scientist in industry, because I know a lot of you are interested in pursuing these kind of roles. So let's hear more from the scientist herself.
Hi, Matt.
Much.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be talking to you today.
So Rinks, so tell us, what is it like to be scientist two? And on that note, what is the difference between scientist two and scientist one and three, you know?
Right. Okay. My company, there's only two brackets. There's scientist one and two. They've sort of added the second role recently as more of a transitionary role between the scientist one and the senior scientist. I did read the exact, descriptions of each role at some point. I guess the main difference is the experience level, so that you have a bit more experience. I think as a scientist one, you'd be expected to have done a PhD at least, and I think as a scientist two, you're expected to have done a PhD and maybe a few postdocs or have some equivalent industry experience already. So yeah, it's the experience, but also the sort of more sort of importance on managing the project and having more say in the decision. So yeah, I guess I'd say it's like a transitionary between scientist one and senior scientist.
Okay, sure. So after finishing, obviously, your PhD and then a few postdocs, do you think it will be possible to go straight for the scientist two position, or you'd probably go straight away for scientist one and then climb up to scientist two?
I think it really, really depends on roles, but they're different between every company. So yeah, I guess maybe a scientist to Imography, where I work, is similar to a senior scientist position elsewhere. And so it's sort of hard to pin down exactly which position you should aim for. It's more about what the role requirements are, I would say. And I think there is scope to probably, jump as well if you've got the right kind of experiences, because that's what it boils down to in the end, is what type of experiences do you have.
Oh, okay. So what is it actually that you do on a day-to-day basis?
Day-to-day basis. Did you want to hear more about the project, or sort of what my day looks like?
Yeah, what the day looks like. Yeah, so people have an idea of, what it's like, depending on the project, but what it's like.
Yeah. So I guess I'd say the day-to-day is not that different, I would say, from when I was in academia. There's definitely more. I think probably the main difference is more in people in other teams, like the collaboration and more meetings. But overall, the thing I like about it is that no 2 days are the same. There's quite a lot of variety. Some days I'll have quite a heavy lab day, and where I'm just in the lab the whole time. Other days I'll have a more desk-based day where I'm, doing analysis and admin and making some presentations, perhaps. And then other days will be more mixed. But I have ultimate control over how I want to have my day, as long as I'm getting the things done that I need.
What about the creative side, the intellectual challenge? How much of this is actually part of your job?
I'd say there's quite a bit of that. So I started on one project, which I've now finished, which was more like cell line development. So that was probably, a bit more self-contained, maybe a bit less thinking involved. But the new project I'm starting on is, does involve quite a bit of questioning and thinking and troubleshooting, and how can we improve things, and also, is both establishing the bioinformatics platform that we use to predict transcription factors that will convert from one cell type to another. So yeah, I'd say it does provide quite a lot of that satisfaction in those regards.
Fair enough. So, so what do you like the most about what you do at the moment?
I really am really enjoying this this new role. I think there's kind of a lot of different good things that have come together. Like the company has quite a positive culture, and the projects are really, you know, they're fast paced, but they're really exciting and interesting. And it feels like, I think one of the things that I guess is different from academia, as that's kind of the theme of your channel, is that it does feel like, you know, we're doing stuff that could be useful in the near future, and we're thinking about the practical ways of, you know, solving these problems. You know, in academia, it's sort of more blue skies research. It's like, oh, you know, what happens if we do this, or, you know, what happens in this particular pathway, whereas here we're very focused. You know, how exactly, what are we going to do to make these treatments work and make them work in practice and in patients. So, you know, everything that we do in our models before we get to that stage is also based on that knowledge as to what's going to be useful later on.
Exactly, and I find it very exciting to work in industry, because you're not just on the edge of knowledge, the edge of science, but you're on the edge of science that is actually going to help someone in foreseeable future. Like you're actually trying to do something that is going to help people, you know, maybe 2, 3, 4 years down the line. And when I was in academia, it just felt like, oh yeah, maybe my research will help someone in 20 years' time, and they will do something that will help someone else in another 20 years' time. And that's how we will get somewhere. So this just feels like much more important job at the moment. Like it's going somewhere that is actually going to help people. Okay, so
Yeah,
then,
well, the basic research is really important as well. But I think, you know, some people are happy with, you know, a longer term rewards. I get more motivated personally by things that I can see, you know, an end to and a benefit to a bit sooner down the line.
so yeah,
But
yeah,
both are very important.
same. Okay, so then what? I actually touched on this a little bit during our previous interview, but what are the common misconceptions about industry? If you
Right.
can think of anything that you thought industry would be like, and it's not at all.
Yeah, so I guess the one thing that we touched on was the fact that you know, that that you imagine you may be just a cog in the machine and have no say in anything and do mindless work. I guess the other, well, possibly misconception in some cases is maybe the level of structure as well. So obviously, you know, as you go up to really big pharma, that probably is true. In smaller biotechs, there is more freedom in that regard, because it depends on entirely what they're doing, but also because, you know, for example, SOPs are still being established, so it's not as structured because you know, there isn't a set way of doing things, and we're working on that and trying to establish it. So I think the structure is less stringent, and, you know, like logging everything that goes on. Obviously, you keep records and so on, but I think there's a different level as to what I imagine elsewhere. Maybe the misconception is that all industry is the same, whereas, you know, it really varies between the size and different companies.
Yeah, definitely. So for anyone who doesn't know what SOPs are, they are standard operating procedures. And these are essentially like little protocols for anything you can think of. So yes, as you said, big pharma, big companies like having thousands of SOPs, because everything needs to be streamlined and controlled. Essentially, controlled is the right word. However, I think, you know, even though I have so many SOPs where I work, there is still freedom, and honestly, there's a lot of logic to the SOPs, because they were created there to increase the productivity and efficiency. So personally, I learned a lot of stuff from SOPs. and realize, what is a good way to do something, what is maybe a bad way to do something. So Rings, out of curiosity, how many hours a week do you actually spend in the lab doing experiments and analyzing data?
Right, out of the whole week. Again, really varies. I think let's think of this last week, for example. I probably spent half the time in the lab, probably a bit more than half the time. For example, today I've actually had a work from home day because I've had quite a few things to plan out, and just aligned better with my personal schedule as well. We have an opportunity. So for the wet lab scientists, we can take 2 days a month to work from home, if we need, and obviously if we need to, there's scope to do that more. People are pretty flexible with that.
Oh, that's really good. That's really good. So, okay. So to add to the question I just asked you, how much time do you spend actually, deciding what you're going to do, designing the experiments?
Yeah, so I would say that takes a significant amount of time. Like for example, with the previous project, I guess that was stuff that I've done more in the past. So I probably didn't spend that much. Well, I spent some time designing it, but not the majority of time. You plan out the first couple of times how you're going to do it, and then it's kind of just churning it out a little bit. But now that I'm starting this platform development project, I'm having to think quite a bit more about it and how it all fits in with the company's goals, and what I have to do. There's a lot of different projects and facets to consider, and prioritize them against each other as well. So that requires a bit more thinking.
Sure. So how many hours do you end up working a week?
A week. So I do 7.5 hours a day, plus the lunch break. So that's what, 8.5.
And do you actually do this? Is it actually 7.5 a day?
I'd say more or less. There, sometimes when things get a bit busy, I do a bit extra. Perhaps other times I will leave a bit early if I need to. So I think it balances out eventually. Like, yeah, there will be weeks where I'm working a bit more. But they have sort of core hours from 10 till 4. And so between, I have to be in between that time. And then otherwise, if I need to leave early for a doctor's appointment or something like that, that's all fine. Yeah, so I would say it is more or less that, yes.
Yeah, which is brilliant. And I think that's really important to mention because it sounds like you're basically doing a postdoc, but you're not having so much stress. Well, you're not experiencing so much stress, and also what you have is normal working hours at the same time. So you have a chance to actually do research and enjoy it, and also have time to yourself.
Yes, and I think people tend to sort of, maybe academics, especially people who are in that sort of hamster wheel of, working all hours of the day, and they seem to think that, you can't just work your 8 hours a day and do a good job. At my company, people work hard when they're there and they give it their all, but they're also big on work-life balance, and they're also big on, not sending emails at crazy hours. And so I think that's really quite admirable. And if anything, if you were staying really, really, really late a lot of the time, then people would possibly question whether you're organizing your time well enough, rather than, the fact that you're showing how hardworking and committed you are. So I think there's a sort of positive attitude that's definitely sorely missing in academia.
Absolutely. I am discouraged to work after 4 o'clock. So my usual hours are from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. and most of my team works within the same hours, and we are all discouraged to work after. And also we are discouraged to have our email or Teams on our phones. So
right, okay.
the moment I finish work, I close my laptop, that's all. And because we are a global company, we have, I have people who I work with all over the globe, so I get emails throughout the whole night. So it's actually really good that I don't get to see them, because I might have a project manager in Australia, for example, or I have a client in San Francisco. So many different time zones. I often, get as much emails over the night as I get during the day.
So it's quite important for you to not see that on your phone and in your
Exactly.
personal time. Yeah.
Exactly. And we are, actively discouraged to not do this. And to actually, finish working at 4 o'clock after 8 hours. But when we work, we do it efficiently. But
Yeah.
definitely, it ends at some point.
Yeah.
And I have weekends to myself, and I finally have time to actually, pursue hobbies and even run this channel. This is something I wanted to do for a long time, but I just didn't have time before I joined industry.
Oh, well, I'm glad you're happy and that you've found time. And yeah, I can relate. Like in my company, if you're there past 5:30, then people will start asking, what are you doing here still, burning the midnight oil.
Exactly. So would you recommend industry to people? Or what kind of
Yes,
people would you recommend it to? Who do you think should join the industry?
yeah, I think I would recommend industry to anyone is interested in that. I think maybe some people are better suited to academia, or they really like that freedom, but any freedom is within the bounds of your funding and whatnot. I would definitely recommend for people to at least consider it as a valid option. And if you enjoy science and academia, then you're most likely going to enjoy it in industry as well. It just depends. You might want to pick the size of your company based on how you like working, and what type of structure you like.
Absolutely. I think it's worth to try both early in your career, and then decide what suits you better, what you prefer. Okay, so could you tell us a little bit about your career trajectory? So I understand you moved from scientist 1 to scientist 2, then to senior scientist, and what happens later?
Right. So again, depending on company, like at Mogrify, we have so we have research associate, scientist 1, scientist 2, senior scientist, principal scientist, and you have directors and the leadership. But you also have the facilities managers, and you also have project managers, and so there's a scope of different positions out there, and there are some within the company, and there are yet different ones in other companies. So I'd say there's a huge scope. Like other companies have team leads or project leads. So there's a whole host of different positions, and I think it's something that you need to untangle as soon as you start applying, and it's something that is difficult. Like for example, I didn't know that research associate was a entry-level position when I started. It took me a while to figure that out, because sometimes the pay range doesn't always agree with the job title, and so you're without really being in that process and doing some applications, it's a bit harder to tell. But so you just have to go out there and figure out based on the responsibilities that the job requires.
Of course, absolutely. So then, what are the salary brackets for all of these roles really? So if you start at an entry position, how much could you expect to earn, and then if you're the principal scientist, how much would you expect then?
Yeah. So again, I think it does vary a lot. I'd say for an entry position, so that would be research associate. I haven't even recently checked what that would be, but that would probably be from like 25 to 30K maybe, and then or maybe 35. And then for scientists, you could, it ranges hugely, but I would imagine it could go up to 50 or 55. Senior scientist, up to 70, or more. You know, there are some particularly well-paid companies, but on average that would be it. And then of course for the higher levels it goes up accordingly, by a sort of 10K each bracket. Yeah, and then actually at director level, I don't even know what they're on.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, I'm only asking because we're coming to the end of the interview, and I think in the next interview we really need to talk about the recruitment process. And I think when you're applying for these jobs, you really need to do your research. You really need to know how much you should be paid, because they will ask you, and if you tell them, you know, an outrageous number, if it's too high, they will not even consider interviewing you. If it's too low, they will interview you, give you an offer, but it'll be a really low offer. So you probably don't want that either. So I think it's just really important for people to know how much they should ask
how much
for.
you're worth. Absolutely. And it's so hard to access this information. I mean, Glassdoor is pretty good, especially for bigger companies. They'll have a sort of generally good idea of what you can expect to be earning, but there's still a huge range. And then, you know, what differentiates between all the people in the same level, but earning different amounts is hard to tell. So, but I think it is really tricky, and there's no way of knowing until you've actually got in there and started discussing with recruiters and HR and so on. And only then you can establish that baseline and figure it out, you know. And we're talking now, so if somebody listens to this now, this will give them some kind of an idea, but in a few years it will all be different again. So people will have to find new resources to.
Yeah, absolutely. But as you said, Glassdoor is a really good resource for this. Absolutely. So I think this was a nice segue to our next interview, where we're going to talk about the recruitment and the interview process for scientist roles. So Rings, thank you so much for joining me today. And I'll see you next week in the next episode. And I really appreciate what you said today. I think it's really, really useful for people to realize what it's like to work as a scientist in you know, small, medium biotech. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, it's great to share this with you, and I hope it helps somebody. It's been great chatting with you.
Thank you. And to everyone else, if you enjoy this content, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.